And we are live on Substack. The cafe is open. Welcome, everybody. Please pull up your comfy chair or your beanbag. Grab yourself a warm, milky drink or adult beverage. I've got some kind of weird sour Fanta or sour Tango. I'm not sponsored. I can say those quite freely. Not entirely sure what it was. Saw it in the supermarket, bought it for Alex, and then spoon theory. I will write a thing on spoon theory, Deborah, so that you've got an idea what I'm talking about. It's basically how to describe that you have a finite amount of resources if you're suffering from chronic health conditions, and if you use up all the week's spoons on a Monday, you're kind of fucked for the rest of the week. And that's where I am. Hello, welcome. I'm kind of fucked, but I'm here, you're here, Sky Blue Eyes is here, and I don't recognize that name either, so welcome to you. And I think, no, Courtney, I've seen you before, so it's very nice to have you back. Ellen's here. Hey, Ellen. Yes, so I'm going with the strange watermelon flavored sour Tango Fanta. I don't know. I just buy what looks interesting and cheap, more importantly. So, are we all ready? Are you wrapped up in your snuggliest blanket if you're in the middle of a thunderstorm like our lovely Laura, or with the fan directed on you if you're still in the middle of this crazy heat wave we're having in the UK? It has cooled down by about 10 degrees our money. I don't know what that makes it bigger something in your money, but it's now down into the low 20s, and last week it was in the low 30s. So you do the maths, double, half, times by the number you first thought of and add 32, something like that. You know the maths. I mean, stick it into an app. That's what we do. Hail. Wow, Sky Blue Eyes, you need to batten down those hatches. Last week, I think it was only last week, might have been the week before, but at the beginning of the week, we had hailstones. My eldest son, my adult son, came running up to me because I was lying down upstairs and said, "Oh my God, there's massive hailstones. I'm terrified they're going to break the windows." I'm like, wow. By the weekend, we were in 30-degree heat. It was insane. And we're not talking Florida thunderstorms, where it stays scorchio right the way through, and it's almost refreshing. This was freezing cold, hailstones, and then within a few days, we're all in our bikinis and our white pasty bodies, looking quite shocking, as only the British really can do, with aplomb and finesse, I like to think. Anyhow, we're all here. We're running on whatever spoons we can manage. If you're not sure what spoons are, just go back to the beginning of the video or Google spoon theory, because I don't want to bore you by explaining it again. Okay, so if you were here with us last Monday, you heard me open with the United States Supreme Court ruling of April the 29th, 2026, Louisiana v. Calais. I used it to describe a system that had never really stopped doing what it was doing, to illustrate the latest franchise location of that scheme, if you will. Tonight, I want to come at it from a different direction. And before I get started, a couple of things. One, if I wasn't doing this now, I would absolutely be watching Joy Reid, and I believe she's on the YouTube, but you'll be able to catch it. It's called Special Coverage, Love, Joy and Power, Tools for Liberation, The Joy Reid Show. And it's so good. If you want to hear about what life is like, has been like for Black and brown people in the United States, from people who actually know, not people who look like this and can read it from textbooks and the internet, you could do a lot worse than going and having a little listen to Joy. And I will, I've saved it in my favorites on YouTube so that I can put the link in the show notes. And with that, shall we get started? So the different direction that I want to come at things from. Oh, and also I want to say, hey, Amy, I also want to say, I am not black or brown. I have absolutely no idea what it feels like to be discriminated against because of the color of your skin. And don't get it twisted. I've been in environments where I've been in the minority, but there's this thing called white privilege, which means even when we're numerically in the minority, we still have all this self-belief and inherited power. So I've never known what it's like to live in a world where I'm considered to be less than, where I have to think differently because of the way that I'm going to be treated because of the color of my earth suit. So that's the caveat. I also want to say one thing that I have learned, which has been really, really beneficial to me, because I'm a child of the 80s, to have grown up with zero racism inside me would have been quite remarkable, especially coming from the environment, very middle class British that I came from, very white middle class British. But one thing that's really helped me to understand framing a little bit better. Nobody, no person of color, no black or brown person is wanting to take anything away from me. They just want what I've got. They want to be able to have the same access to stuff as I've got with the same rules applying. And I just can't see where the problem is in that. That sounds like a very reasonable ask. And if I can answer the questions that I've got in my own mind and share those answers with a group of people who might also have those questions, then I really want to do that because I want to learn. I want to be an ally to any community who are finding that they don't have the same rights as everybody else. So that's where we're going with this. And that's how I got to this series of 3. So last week we looked at the for-profit prison system and how it's basically just slavery repackaged. This week we're going to look at voting rights, and after this I'm going to post an article about medical atrocities and how they've particularly targeted Black communities, not just in the United States, but how it affects people in the UK as well. And there's a very important reason why I'm doing it that way. So this is a 3-part thing, but one of the parts is a written part, because some of the practices carried out in the name of medicine on Black and brown men and women and children are really quite shocking and horrendous. And I was thinking, how do I do this? Do I do a separate show on that? Do I do it just for my paid subscribers? Do I do an article for my paid subscribers? I thought, no, 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 no. What you want me, I'm telling myself because I have these conversations, is you want to provide the information. You don't want to provide the information in a salacious way. You want to research it, find it, pull it together and present it so people can read it in one digestible, and I say digestible with a huge pinch of salt, because a lot of it is extremely indigestible and very unpalatable. But what I want is for anyone who wants to have a look at it to be able to have a look at it. So the sensible thing, and I hope it's okay with all of you, is for me to write it in an article that you can choose to look at or not. Or you can choose to look at the receipts and go and investigate through those or not. I want everybody who wants to have a look at it to be able to, but I am not prepared to use the suffering the deeply personal suffering of Black and brown people for clicks, for views, for an audience. So is that okay? Does that explain why I've done my three-parter in 2 lives and 1 article? And I'm going to make the article available. It's going to go straight up as soon as this live posts. So everybody can get it. If you want to read it, great, have a read. If you want to just have a quick look so you can see some of the sources that I used, so you can go and have a look at those sources, awesome. If it's just not something that you can cope with, then just, leave it to one side. But I cannot, in all good conscience, profit, and I mean that quite loosely because I'm not making a lot of money here, but I can't use the story of the atrocities carried out by the medical establishment on Black and brown people to benefit me. And yes, even by putting an article up, that might benefit me also, but this is the least exploitative way I could find to present the information. So that was a really long-winded way of explaining why I've done it the way I've done it, but I've been back and forwards and done some soul searching. I want to cover the information. I want everybody to know the information, but I don't want to do it in a way that's exploitative, or I want to do it as far as possible in a way that's not exploitative. I hope that explains that. Whew. Let's move on. Hey, Daniel. Hey, Tash. Lovely to see you both here. So that's the context. That's the setting. Let's have a look at voting rights and what on earth's been going on. So Louisiana v. Calais, we're all familiar with it now. But it's not just another data point in the story of how Black Americans have been economically and physically subjugated. It's the end of a very specific road, a road that began in 1870 when the United States government made a promise to Black Americans that it has been trying to unpick, undermine, and ultimately destroy ever since then. The promise was simple. You can vote. Your vote counts. No one can take that away from you. And if you're voting for Keir Starmer, as Natasha just mentioned, you may be in a minority. I don't know, Natasha. I think it's like having an adult in the room, and I appreciate that, but I think there are an awful lot of things that he's not getting quite right that he needs to work on. Unfortunately, it's a bit fence city, but I think he could be great. I think he's not being great at the moment. That's I'm not a politician, thank God. I wouldn't do it for all the money. So that was the promise. Louisiana v. Calais is the Supreme Court of the United States in 2026, making that promise all but meaningless. Tonight, we're going to walk that road from beginning to end, all 156 years of it. So get comfy. Oh, we're going to be here a little while. You cannot understand fully, well, I couldn't understand fully what happened on April the 29th of this year without understanding what happened on March the 7th of 1965. And you can't understand that without understanding what happened in Mississippi in 1890. And you can't understand any of it without going back to where that promise was made and looking very carefully at who was in the room when it was written and what they were already planning to do with it the moment the ink was dry. So we'll recap the Supreme Court decision of April 29th of this year, Louisiana v. Calais. So the ruling was 6-3. Samuel Alito writing for the majority. I can't call those people justice. Some of them are justices, some of them not so much. The court held that Louisiana's congressional map, which was drawn to include a second majority Black district in compliance with a lower court order, violated the Equal Protection Clause. Justice Elena Kagan, dissenting, wrote the majority had rendered Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, quote, all but a dead letter. The NAACP President Derek Johnson is quoted as saying the Supreme Court betrayed black voters, they betrayed America, and they betrayed our democracy. And the wonderful Justin Levitt, election law expert, said, quote, this is burn the house down and pretend the house still exists because you can point to where the foundation used to be. And we mentioned those opinions last time, but I think it's important to state them again because not everybody was here last time. So welcome to anyone who hasn't been here before. Welcome back to all our lovely mamacitas who pop in from time to time. It's so lovely to have you all here. The focus of tonight's meeting, ladies and gentlemen, is the war on the vote, how they've been trying to take it away since the day they gave it. Let's have a look. So, part 1, the promise. In 1870, 5 years after the end of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment, the United States ratified the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. It said this: the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. 11 words into the guarantee of the most fundamental right in a democracy, the right to choose who governs you, the right to have a say in the laws that you live under, the right that, if you have it and can exercise it freely, gives you at least a fighting chance of changing everything else. For black men in America in 1870, this was not an abstract principle. These were men who'd been property. They had been bought and sold. They had watched their families torn apart at auctions. They'd been beaten, worked to exhaustion, and denied every legal protection a human being is entitled to. And now the Constitution of the United States has said, you're a citizen, you can vote, no one can take that away from you on the basis of your race. Wow, amazing, right? It was, in every meaningful sense, a revolution. And the people who had just lost the Civil War knew it. Because here's the thing about the vote that makes it different from everything else that we discussed in our last episode. Convict leasing extracted labor, redlining prevented wealth, the war on drugs targeted communities. All of those things were done to Black Americans by a system that held all the power. But the vote is the mechanism by which you take some of that power back. The vote is how you elect the legislators who write the laws. The vote is how you hold accountable the officials who enforce them. And the vote is how you build political power substantial enough to change the architecture of the system itself. Which means for anyone who wanted to keep that original system intact, the vote was the most dangerous thing in the world. Remember that. And they got to work on destroying it almost immediately. So let's have a look at how they did that with part 2, the arsenal. The 15th Amendment said the right to vote could not be denied on account of race. So the states that wanted to deny it on account of race got creative. Hate really does have muscles sometimes, doesn't it? They wouldn't deny it on account of race. They would deny it on account of other things. Things that, by extraordinary coincidence, wouldn't you believe it, applied almost exclusively to black voters. Who'd have thunk, right? Let me walk you through the arsenal because the details matter. The details are, as always, the receipts. So, we had poll taxes. To vote, you had to pay a fee. In states where Black Americans had been systematically prevented from accumulating wealth, where they had been paid nothing for generations, where they had been fined and leased and exploited under the black codes we looked at last time, a poll tax was not a minor inconvenience. It was an insurmountable barrier, and it was supposed to be. That was by design. Literacy tests. To vote, now that seems on the face of it like, oh, that seems, fair enough. Let me tell you a little bit more about these literacy tests. To vote, you had to demonstrate literacy administered at the sole discretion of white registrars. A black professor might be asked to interpret an obscure provision of the state constitution to the registrar's entire satisfaction, while he just waves through an illiterate white man without question. The test was never about literacy. It was about who the registrar decided passed and could then vote. Grandfather clauses. Here's another weapon in the arsenal. Several states passed laws saying you could vote if your grandfather had voted, and they did this with a straight fucking face. The grandfathers of Black Americans in the South had been enslaved. They hadn't voted. They couldn't vote. The grandfather clause excluded the descendants of enslaved people from the franchise while protecting the voting rights of white men whose own literacy and wealth might not have survived scrutiny if they'd had to meet the other tests. I don't think they could spell civic test, Anne. That's MAGA we're talking about, for those of you who can't see the chat. So, they were the more creative approaches. But then that brings us to the method that required no legal creativity at all. Economic retaliation. If you tried to register to vote, you might lose your job. Your landlord might evict you. Your credit might be called in. And if those things didn't stop you, there's one more little tool in the arsenal that always guarantees results. Violence. If those things weren't enough to put you off voting, so losing your job, losing your home, having no money, there were men who would come to your house at night with torches. You know I'm not making this stuff up. We all know about this stuff. There were men who would beat you on the courthouse steps in front of witnesses they knew would not testify against them. There were men who would kill you and face no legal consequence whatsoever because the law was theirs and had never been yours. And by you, I don't mean people that look like me. Let's have a look at Mississippi. So in 1890, Mississippi held a constitutional convention specifically to disenfranchise black voters, while technically complying with the 15th Amendment. The new constitution introduced literary tests, poll taxes, and residency requirements. The result? In 1890, approximately 190,000 black voters were registered in Mississippi. By 1892, that number had fallen to approximately 8,600 in 2 years. Not through persuasion, not through legitimate democratic processes, through the deliberate, systematic legal erasure of an entire community's political existence. Sit with those numbers. 190,000. 2 years later, 8,600. That's not voter suppression by degrees. That's near total political annihilation. And it was achieved not through violence alone, though violence was always present, but through laws passed by legislatures, signed by governors, upheld by the courts. This is just the world that existed for black voters across the South for the next 75 years. We're not talking about something that happened in the distant past, in the era of slavery. We're talking after emancipation, after the 15th Amendment, after the constitutional promise that this could not happen. Well, it happened anyway, for 3/4 of a century. And the federal government, with a few partial and largely ineffective exceptions, just looked the other way. Until a bridge. And you know where that bridge was? I bet you do. That bridge was in Selma, Alabama. And you know when it was? That was on a Sunday in March in 1965. So let's have a look at Bloody Sunday and the law that followed. For anyone who doesn't know the story of John Lewis, here's a little nutshell recap for you. So John Robert Lewis was born in 1940 in Pike County, Alabama, and he was the son of sharecroppers. He was one of 13 children. He grew up picking cotton. He was not supposed to amount to much by the logic of the system that we've been describing so far. He became one of the most important humans in 20th century American history. And I don't say that lightly, and it's not meant to be hyperbolic. By 1965, Lewis was 25 years old and already a veteran of the civil rights movement. He'd been beaten. He'd been arrested. He'd sat at lunch counters while people poured food over his head and spat in his face, and he had not moved. He was, by any measure, a man who understood what courage required. And I think it's really important that we all take a moment. I am pretty certain that my black and brown brothers and sisters and cousins out there are all extremely familiar with this story, and it's just something they know. But for those of us who aren't as familiar with it, those of us for whom it's not so inherent, let's think about it. Just keep it in a part of our mind when we look at what's going on around us, because I think it's important context. On March the 7th, 1965, John Lewis led approximately 600 people across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. They were marching to Montgomery, the state capital, to demand voting rights. They were peaceful. They were orderly. They were singing. At the end of the bridge, however, they were met by Alabama state troopers and a sheriff's posse. The troopers were on horseback. Some carried clubs wrapped in barbed wire. Does that sound like crowd control to you? Because that sounds a little bit ominous to me. That sounds like someone who's looking for not so much a fight, but a slaughter. What happened next, incredibly, when we're thinking about the times, the mid-1960s, was filmed and broadcast on national television that evening, interrupting a primetime broadcast of Judgment at Nuremberg. I shit you not. Which, given what Americans were about to watch, this live coverage, is a historical irony so sharp it could cut glass. Well, the troopers charged on the peaceful protesters. They beat the people to the ground. They used tear gas. John Lewis's skull was fractured by a trooper's baton, and he nearly died on that bridge, which is even more incredible when you come to see what he went on to do. Quite a remarkable man. The footage shocked the nation. It shocked the world. It made undeniable, visible, and impossible to look away from what Black Americans in the South had been saying for a century. The system was not accidentally failing them. It was deliberately, violently protecting itself. So, a bit more detail. 600 marchers on March the 7th, 1965, led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams, attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. The state troopers and the sheriff's posse attached the marchers with those clubs and with tear gas. John Lewis, as we said, suffered a fractured skull, and the attack was filmed and broadcast nationally, interrupting ABC's showing of Judgment at Nuremberg. The footage is credited as a turning point in public and political support for federal voting rights legislation. And 6 days later, President Lyndon Johnson went before a joint session of Congress. He used the language of the movement, the civil rights movement. He said, quote, "We shall overcome." And he asked Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act, which passed in August of 1965. Can you imagine some atrocity being highlighted in March and a president moving everything he could to address and rebalance that atrocity by August of the same year? Yeah. No, I mean, I have a vague memory of things like that happening once upon a time, yesteryear. But no, it's not something I've seen happening recently, let's say. So here is what that act actually did, because this matters enormously for everything that follows. The Voting Rights Act did many things, but most powerfully, it provided Section 5. Section 5 required that certain states and localities, those with a documented history of voting discrimination, so they're not being targeted randomly, there's a cause, predominantly, but not exclusively to the South, those states had to obtain federal pre-clearance before making any changes to their voting laws or procedures. Any change. That could be moving a polling place, changing registration requirements, redrawing a district boundary, handing out bottles of water to people in the queue, any of it. You had to ask permission first, and the burden of proof was on you, the state, to demonstrate that your proposed change would not make things worse for minority voters. Not on the voters to prove it would, on the state themselves to prove that it wouldn't. That reversal of the burden of proof was everything. It meant that the whole arsenal of creative disenfranchisement that we just walked through had to pass federal scrutiny before it could take effect. And that doesn't mean it wouldn't. I mean, we've seen appalling things happening at the federal level just recently, but it was another layer that it had to go through. There were another set of checks and balances that could come into action. I'm not saying that they would. So, what happened after this then? Excuse me. It's still quite warm and muggy and close. here, but I don't have the fan on because it was kind of making me all windswept and unnecessary. So, after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, black voter registration in the South increased from approximately 31% in 1965 to around 73% by 1969. That's more than doubled, significantly more than doubled. The number of black elected officials in the South rose from approximately 300 in 1965 to over 1,000 by 1970. And it continued to rise through subsequent decades. The Voting Rights Act was reauthorized by Congress, reauthorized, not just once, not just twice, in 1970, in the best year there ever was, I was born, 1975, in 1982, and 2006. The 2076, we're not there yet, Tracy, calm down. The 2006 reauthorization passed the House 390 to 33 and the Senate 98 to 0. Butt kiss, nada. So from 31% to 73% in just 4 years. Think about what that means in human terms. Millions of people who'd been locked out of democracy, some for their entire lives, suddenly able to just walk into a polling place and cast a vote that counted. That is what Section 5 made possible. And that is why, when the Supreme Court decided to gut it in 2013, the consequences were immediate, predictable, and catastrophic. Are you all ready for part 4? Well, let's crack on then. What are you waiting for? Shelby County. This you may have heard to referred as the umbrella in the rainstorm, rather beautifully, and we will get to that. So Shelby County is a suburban county in Alabama. Do you know it, Laura? Is it anywhere near you? I bet they didn't have any Democratic primary forms in their polling stations either. Or maybe they do. Maybe they've improved things. I don't know. I wasn't there. So in 2010, Shelby County had a population that was approximately 87% white. Its county commission had never had a black member. In 2010, Shelby County sued the United States Attorney General Eric Holder, challenging the constitutionality of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Their argument was that the formula used to determine which states needed federal pre-clearance was based on outdated data. The country had changed, they said. The discrimination that justified Section 5 in 1965 no longer existed at those levels. Yeah, they did. The case went to the Supreme Court, and in June 2013, in a 5-4 ruling, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion in Shelby County versus Holder. Roberts didn't strike down Section 5 itself because, in my opinion, allegedly, he's an asshole, not an idiot. He struck down Section 4, the formula that determined which states Section 5 applied to. So if you got no Section 4, you got no mechanism to pick states that it applies to. If there's no mechanism to pick the states, then it doesn't apply. So Section 5 is sitting there all happy like, hello, we're waiting to, just help you keep things non-discriminatory. Unfortunately, we can't be used because the thing that you were using to decide when we could be used now no longer exists. So we're here if you ever need us, but you can't do anything with us. The practical effect, therefore, was identical to striking down Section 5 entirely. Without a formula to determine who it applied to, Section 5 had no enforcement mechanism. It was left standing but rendered completely inoperable. It was like a lock without a key, a law with no teeth. Roberts wrote the line that has been haunting voting rights law ever since. Quote, "Our country has changed." Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to argue that that may be true. Lots of things have changed. Doesn't mean it's improved. Doesn't mean some of the same old problems aren't still there. Doesn't mean those problems ever actually went away. It's just until 2013, there was a mechanism to try and lessen the impact of that inherent racism. Sorry, I tend to go off on one. I just can't be doing with injustice. It's so unhinged. So, Shelby County versus Holder 2013. Supreme Court ruling 5-4. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, held that the coverage formula in Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional, as it was based on data over 40 years old and did not reflect current conditions. Without a valid coverage formula, Section 5 pre-clearance requirements became unenforceable. That was the argument. That was the aim. Thankfully, there are still some wise voices prevailing at this point, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the dissent, and she joined Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. Ginsburg wrote that throwing out pre-clearance, quote, "when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes, is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet." I think she's basically saying there, you do the math. Justice Ginsburg's dissent contained the line that's become a defining characteristic of that ruling, throwing out the pre-clearance. And I'm sorry if I'm over-egging this pudding, but it's kind of a significant pudding, and it's got a lot of eggs in it. Throwing out the pre-clearance when it's worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. It's unhinged. She also pointed out something the majority conspicuously chose to ignore. Well, there's a shocker. When Congress reauthorized the Voting Rights Act in 2006, unanimously, with 390 votes in the House and 98 in the Senate, it had before it thousands of pages documenting ongoing voting discrimination in the covered states. Evidence that the discrimination hadn't ended, it had adapted. It had become more sophisticated. Don't we love sophisticated hatred? More deniable. But it was still there and it was still working. The majority threw out that evidence. They said the country had changed, and within hours of the ruling, you know what happened. The covered states demonstrated exactly how much the country had really changed. Texas announced it would immediately implement voter ID that had been previously blocked under Section 5 pre-clearance. Within days, North Carolina began drafting legislation, and if you'll humor me, we'll take a little look at that. So, North Carolina, HB 589 of 2013 and the Fourth Circuit ruling. Following Shelby County, North Carolina's Republican-controlled legislature passed HB 589, which eliminated same-day voter registration. It cut early voting by a week. It eliminated out-of-precinct voting and introduced strict photo ID requirements. Critically, and please listen to this bit, the legislature had requested data. Sound like anything you may have heard recently? Just ponder on that. The legislator had requested data on which voting methods were disproportionately used by Black voters, then eliminated those specific methods, because of course they did. In 2016, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down the law, finding that its provisions target African Americans with almost, quote, target African Americans with almost surgical precision. The court found that the legislature had, quote, retained only the types of photo ID that white North Carolinians were more likely to possess, while eliminating the options more commonly held by the Black voters. Targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. That phrase is in a federal court ruling, written by judges appointed by presidents of both parties, based on the legislature's own documents, which showed them requesting racial data and then acting on it. This is not a theory. This is a finding of fact by a federal court. The receipts were in the legislature's own files. And this, mamacitas, is what Chief Justice Roberts meant when he said the country had changed. The country had changed. The methods had changed. The intent, not so much. Part 5. The resistance and the pushback. This is where we all need to prick up our ears and pay attention, because we might learn a thing or two that we might need. I don't know, say there was an upcoming midterm election on the horizon. Just saying. I want to spend a moment on a case that gave voting rights advocates genuine, if short-lived, reason for cautious hope, because this story is not entirely one of unbroken defeat, and you deserve the full picture. In 2021, Alabama redrew its congressional, that was North Carolina, Laura. Alabama redrew its congressional district maps following the 2020 census. Alabama's population is approximately 27% Black. The maps Alabama drew contained exactly one majority Black congressional district out of 7. Civil rights organizations sued, arguing this violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the provision that prohibits voting practices that discriminate on the basis of race, and which survived Shelby County intact. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court as Merrill versus Milligan. And in a 5-4 ruling in 2023, with Chief Justice Roberts joining the 4 liberal justices this time, the court ruled against Alabama. Section 2, the court said, still had meaning. Racial gerrymandering that diluted Black voting power was still illegal. This was a decision in 2023, folks. I've got stuff in my kitchen cupboard older than 2023. This is like 5 minutes ago when you get to my age. So, Merrill versus Milligan, 2023. Supreme Court ruling 5-4. Chief Injustice Roberts, writing for the majority, joined by Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, and Kavanaugh this time. The court held that Alabama's congressional map likely violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act by packing black voters into a single district and failing to create a second district where black voters had an opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. Alabama was ordered to draw new maps. It was a significant ruling. It was, in retrospect, a last stand rather than a turning point, unfortunately, because we've all seen what's happened in the short time since. And so, what was Alabama's response? Well, let's just say it's not necessarily what we would hope for, but probably entirely what we would expect. Their response to being told by the Supreme Court of the United States to draw new maps was essentially to shrug and draw the same maps again. I mean, they're new, they're identical to the old ones, but these are the new ones. The Republican-controlled legislature produced new maps that still only had one majority black district. I mean, you just have to do the basic maths. You've got 7 districts. You've got 1 in 4, more than 1 in 4 of your population are black. I mean, that's almost, say you had 8, that'd be 2. It is not hard to work it out. That's why the court made this decision. It's really simple maths. The lower court held Alabama in contempt and then appointed a special master to draw the maps instead, because clearly they were incapable of following basic court orders. But watch what Alabama's defiance was actually telling us, because that's the important part. It was telling us that the resistance to black political representation had reached the point where a state legislature would openly defy a Supreme Court ruling rather than comply with it. And it was telling us that the composition of the Supreme Court was about to shift in ways that would make Alabama's gamble look less like recklessness and more like strategy. Because 3 years after Merrill versus Milligan gave Section 2 a stay of execution, Louisiana versus Calais put it in the ground and buried it. And that's where we are now. Let's move to part 6. Sorry, I don't know if I mentioned it's still quite warm. I'm doing my best on 0 spoons. If you missed the beginning, just go back to the beginning or Google spoon theory. April 29th, 2026. Yeah, we're back here again. Back where we started. But by now, we're all a little bit more familiar with the road that led to here. Louisiana had redrawn its congressional maps under court order to include a second majority black district. The maps were challenged. The Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling written by Justice Samuel Alito, held that drawing a map specifically to give black voters a second district where they could elect a representative of their choice violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. So let me translate that, if I may. If I've got this right, correct me if I'm wrong. The court said that trying to remedy the racially discriminatory effects of the previous map drawing by taking race into account when drawing new maps was itself unconstitutional racial discrimination. And they said that with a straight face. The remedy for racism, the court said, in effect, is racist. There are no words, are there? But this is not going to be much of a live show or podcast if I don't speak, so let's find some. So let's look at the full weight of the decision. The 6-3 majority held that Louisiana's remedial congressional map, which was drawn to comply with a lower court order finding a Section 2 violation, itself violated the Equal Protection Clause because race was a predominant factor in its drawing. In Justice Alito, writing for the majority, that's basically the essence of the majority decision. Justice Kagan's dissent, joined by Justices Sotomayor and Jackson, stated that the majority had rendered Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, quote, all but a dead letter. Democracy Docket said, quote, Section 2's prohibition on racially discriminatory maps was, until now, the last remaining legal check on the partisan impulse to draw wildly contorted and disjointed electoral districts. And Kareem Creighton for the Brennan Center for Justice said, quote, Justice Alito essentially shrugs at the millions of voters whose ability to elect representatives of their choice have greatly improved with Section 2. Quite right, Anne. Anne points out that white people have faced so much discrimination. Poor us. Let's all get out our teeny tiny violins. We all playing teeny tiny violins? Yeah. Section 2 is all but a dead letter, and it's kind of hard to argue with that. Those are Justice Kagan's words. A sitting Supreme Court justice in a formal dissent describing what the majority of her own court has done to the last meaningful protection Black voters had against electoral map manipulation. The umbrella that Justice Ginsburg described in 2013 was already in pieces. Louisiana versus Calais burned the remains beyond recognition. And here's the thing I need you to understand about why this matters beyond voting itself. We spent our last episode documenting a system designed to extract labor from Black Americans, to prevent the accumulation of wealth, to pipeline Black bodies into for-profit prisons. All of that is maintained and perpetuated through, all say it together, legislation. Through laws passed by legislators. Do you see where I'm going with this? Legislators elected by voters in districts drawn by the people who benefit from keeping the discriminatory system intact. The vote is the key to the lock. It always has been, which is why they've never stopped trying to take it away. All makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So, part 7, the key to the lock. I want to end with something I found really interesting and I didn't know about. I'd heard it in passing, but it had never been presented in a way where I was paying enough attention to really take notice and think, oh, what's that all about? But now I know a little bit about what it's all about and I'd like to share it if you would permit me. So let's end with this. This is a bill, a very specific bill, and it has a very specific name. And some of you will be familiar with it. I don't know how big a thing it is, thank you, Amy, our Secretary Amy, unpaid, but very much loved. Just keeping us to our schedule so that we don't clash with the lovely Glenn, because We don't want to do that. I want to see what Glenn's got to say. We wouldn't all be here if it weren't for Glenn, most of us. So, we're coming down the hill, ladies and gentlemen. We are heading for home. Does anybody know what this bill that I'm alluding to might be? I'm not going to dither and wait for you to, for the internet, you to hear my question, you to have a think about my question, you to type the answer and the internet to internet back, because we just don't have the time for that kind of game playing, right? I will put you out of your misery. Anybody who got it correct already, just give yourselves a very firm pat on the back and have a little smug smile. That's how we do it in the UK. HR 40. This has been introduced in every single Congress since 1989. So smack on the hands. Thank you, the good Pam. Glenn's on at 9, but I'm still not going to dilly-dally because we're really going for the finish line now. We're picking up steam. Is that right? Picking up steam? Let's go for it anyway. House Resolution 40, HR 40. Every single Congress since 1989. None of us have got an excuse for not knowing about this. And we all know who I'm really pointing at. She didn't know. 37 years. It has never once made it to a floor vote in the full House of Representatives. It has never been debated on its merits by the full Senate. It has never been signed into law. That bit we knew, the last bit. HR 40 does not propose reparations, no matter what your white nationalist friend's neighbor's auntie's dog is telling you on Facebook. It does not allocate a single dollar. All it does is proposes a commission to study the history and ongoing effects of that slavery and discrimination that was so fundamental to parts of the United States, and to make recommendation about potential remedies, including, yes, but not limited to reparations. It proposes a study. It proposes improving our minds. It proposes using the information and the data that we've got to assess the situation that we're in now and work out a way forward with integrity and data and facts, for God's sake. 37 years and not even a study. So, what is HR 40? It is a commission to study reparation proposals for African Americans. First introduced by Representative John Conyers of Michigan in 1989. It's been introduced in every subsequent Congress, and it's named HR 40 for the 40 acres promised to formerly enslaved people following the Civil War and never delivered. The bill has never received a floor vote in the full House or Senate. In 2021, the House Judiciary Committee approved it for the first time, advancing it to the full House, where it stalled, because of course it did. It has not advanced further. Named HR 40 for the 40 acres. We know about the 40 acres. General William Sherman's Special Field Order number 15, issued in January 1865, if you know your history. This set aside land along the South Carolina and Georgia coasts for distribution to formerly enslaved families in 40-acre plots. It was a recognition, however partial and however late, that people who'd been worked to exhaustion for generations with nothing who had built the economic foundations of the wealthiest nation in the world with their bodies and their blood and their lives, were owed something, just a little something. President Andrew Johnson rescinded the order after Lincoln's assassination. The land was returned to its former Confederate owners. The 40 acres were never delivered. We know that. The bill asking for a study of whether something might be owed is named for that broken promise, H.R. 40, and it cannot get a floor vote in 2026, where things have changed. Really? John Lewis introduced it. He introduced it or co-sponsored it every Congress for the last years of his life. John Lewis, remember him? Had his skull fractured on the Edmund Pettus Bridge at the age of 25, fighting for the right to vote. John Lewis, who spent the following 55 years in public life fighting for that right and for justice and for the acknowledgement of a history that too many people prefer to leave buried. He served as a United States representative for Georgia's 5th Congressional District from 1987 until his sad passing from pancreatic cancer on July 17th, 2020. He was a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a leader of the 1963 March on Washington, and one of the original Freedom Riders. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2011. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would have restored the pre-clearance formula gutted by Shelby County versus Holder, passed the House twice and was killed in the Senate by filibuster both times. Sadly, John Lewis died before seeing it pass. It has still not passed. So he died in 2020 in July. Never saw his voting rights bill pass. Never saw HR 40 get to a floor vote. He never saw the 40 acres even acknowledged, let alone delivered. He died having spent his entire adult life from the age of 15, when he first tried to register to vote and was told he lived in the wrong county, fighting for something the Constitution had promised in 1870 and the country had spent 150 years finding new ways to take back. He really was the conscience of Congress, Deborah. That's a beautiful way to put it. So now I want to bring us back to tonight, to 2026, to Louisiana v. Calais, which I know a lot of us are, even non-Americans are still smarting over, which left Section 2 rendered all but a dead letter. Because here is the through line that connects everything across both episodes, last week and this week, on the subject. The system we documented last time, convict leasing, the war on drugs, private prisons, ICE detention, the franchise that never closed, that system is maintained by legislation. And legislation is passed by legislators, and legislators are elected by voters, and voters cast their ballots in districts drawn by the people who benefit from keeping the system intact. Take away the vote or dilute it until it doesn't matter, and you take away the mechanism by which any of it can be changed through democratic means. We know this. We're not shouting about it enough. It is not coincidence. It is not an oversight. It is the architecture. Because the vote is the key to the lock. It has always been the key to the lock. And they've known that since 1870, when they looked at the 15th Amendment and started building the arsenal to make it meaningless. They haven't stopped. They've just kept updating the methods. Yeah, things have changed. We've got new sneaky ways to stop people we don't like from having a voice. So that pretty much brings us to a close. I will, when this show gets posted, include the link to Joy Reid's show if anybody wants to go and see that. It looked absolutely splendid. The short part that I managed to catch before I came on live looked really, really interesting, and thoroughly recommend Joy Reid. She's just fantastic and really informative, really well researched, and I just enjoy watching her very, very much. So, and straight after we finish, I will post the medical malpractice, I want to call it, the look at how the medical system has failed and abused Black and brown people for decades. And that will be a written piece, so that if you want to find out more, you can go and have a look. If it's not something that you could palate, then that's okay. You don't have to. It's not going to be behind any kind of paywall, because I don't want to make money out of the suffering of other people. That's not okay. Not for me, anyway. 2 episodes, 1 article, 1 system, 1 through line from 1865 to April 29th, 2026 and onwards. They kept the labour, they prevented the wealth, they blocked the power to change any of it. And they did it at every stage with the blessing of the law, sometimes with the law as the weapon, sometimes with the law as the alibi, but always with the law on their side and justice somewhere else entirely. And justice, what, ladies and gentlemen? I'll let you pop it in the chat. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here, for listening, for joining in this journey of me finding out more about areas where I've got knowledge gaps, and just telling you this is stuff I didn't know and I found really interesting, and I wondered if you guys might find it interesting too. So thank you for indulging me and being there as an impetus to getting me to go find out the answers to these questions that I don't know, by associating with all of you and the kind of things that you're telling me that you're interested in. It's opening my mind, and things are creeping in, and I'm like, I didn't know that. Go look. I didn't know that. Go look. And then sometimes I find the answers interesting enough to want to share with you. And that's what we do, really. That's certainly the Monday night show anyway. We just have a little look at stuff that we might not know stuff about and see if we can find more information. So I really appreciate you taking the time to care enough to sit with the weight of the 2 episodes if you've been here for both, because it is weighty and I want you to feel that weight. If you need to head off now, please go with love. Take care of yourselves. If prayer and reflection is not your thing, then we send you on your way with our thanks and our love. We would ask that if you enjoyed the episode, if it meant something to you, please share them. Please recommend them to a friend. If you're not already subscribed on Substack or YouTube, come and find us. Paid subscribers, as I say, will get a full companion documents for both episodes. The one for episode 1 has already gone up. The one for this episode will go up later this evening. The complete timelines, quotes, reading lists, and the receipts behind the receipts, because we don't say it if we can't show it. And I want you to be able to show it too, if you want to. Costs a few quid, price of a paid subscription. The rest of it, all yours for free. So if you enjoyed the show, please recommend us to a friend. If you didn't enjoy the show, please recommend us to an enemy, and we all win. And now, if you would like to stay for our closing reflection, please take a breath. Let it out. Get settled, get grounded, connect with whatever higher power works in your life, in whatever way feels right for you in this moment now. And tonight's reflection is from the Bible, and it's from the prophet Amos, chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. If you're all ready, I will begin. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs, I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Let's all be part of letting justice roll on like a river. Amen. Thank you all. And whatever time Glenn's on tonight, you've still got a little bit of time to do your things that you need to do to get ready. And hopefully we will see you back here on Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for our Mama's meeting with the wonderful newly sprayed Mount Mama, where we put all the naughty boys and girls for safekeeping. If you want to nominate somebody to be included in Mount Mama because they need a little bit of time out, drop us a line. Let us know who you want to go in there and why they need to go in there this week. If there's anybody we put in before and you think they've redeemed themselves and it's time that they get on out and enjoy their little lives, then let us know. This is just for safekeeping. This is a naughty step. You can absolutely redeem yourself. Not seeing an awful lot of redemption in the current administration, but if you think someone's redeemed yourself, then let us know and we will let them out. As I say, not let anybody out so far. It's getting very crowded in there, so I'm sure they'd all appreciate it if you think somebody should be let out. But more importantly, who do we add? Let me know by 6 p.m. at the very, 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 very latest on Thursday, Eastern Time. And I will make sure that they are included. But now, ladies and gentlemen, running on negative spoons for you, because just being here gives me a spoon or two to get through the next thing. But I have been Mama. And I can't wait to see you all again because you make me happy. I'm afraid, though, for tonight, the cafe is now closed. Good night, everybody. See you next time.